Ramazan Emeev versus David Zawada. We got minus 260 on the Russian and plus 220 on David Zawada. So let's start off with Ramazan Emeev, who going into taping this fight, I initially thought that I was going to be making a lock of the night play, 5 units, minus 250 on Emeev, but I'm sort of backtracking from that now. So don't get me wrong. I still think that he goes out there and has a solid performance. I've always looked at him as a guy that has a very efficient MMA style, from his striking to his clinch game to being able to take opponents down. The guy does a really good job of mixing all those facets of MMA together and coming out on the winning end more often than not. He has a great record of 19-4. He's been around the game since 2009 and has definitely accumulated a lot of experience in that amount of time. His only loss in the UFC up to this point is against Anthony Rocco Martin, but he's only been in the UFC for about 5 fights. He hasn't been the most active guy, which is a little bit of a detriment to him in my opinion, but he's slowly starting to get in there and trying to make a name for himself. Obviously, the setback to Anthony Rocco Martin has kind of extinguished the heat that was behind him going into that fight. However, this fight against David Zawada should definitely help him bring that heat back. Now, my only concern here with Zawada is, well, not only, I have a couple concerns here with, Ramazan Emeev, is one, his volume and output seems to be lacking a little bit. He's usually striking in about the 30 strikes per fight range, or per 15 minutes, that we should say. But he's very like calm, cool, and collected type of striker, where he's just waiting for his openings and then he lunges forward and lands a couple good shots. He mainly throws in 2 punch combinations, the 1-2 down the middle, but his 2 is very, very sneaky. Even when he throws it as a naked punch, it lands more often than not. Now, it's saying on UFC stats that he strikes at a 43% clip. However, it seems like he's a little bit more effective given how often he's landing that right hand especially. The way that he mixes in his clinch game as well with his striking is very impressive, as well as mixing in the takedowns to follow up those clinch positions is very impressive as well too. The issue that I have with his takedowns now is that sometimes he I'm not saying they're desperation shots per se, but I feel like they're more so shots that are that leave him open and kind of prone to submissions at times. We see perfect examples of that in his Anthony Rocco Martin fight, where Martin's in on a couple Kimura attempts. More often than not, people use Kimuras to defend takedowns, but Martin was quite close to completing one of those Kimura attempts. Now, even in the Nicholas Stolze fight, we see Emeev, landed 5 takedowns in that fight, but more often than not in those takedown attempts, he's ending up in a guillotine of Stolze. And Stolze obviously doesn't complete any of those submissions, but when you're going up against a high-level jiu-jitsu player like David Zawada, you have to be a little bit more mindful of where your neck is when you're trying to complete these takedowns. Now, let's go over to the Zawada side of things, where Zawada, he's a veteran. He has 22 fights in total now. This is going to be his 23rd fight. Just 1 fight less than Emeev, but he's been around the globe. Like, he had a solid campaign with KSW before coming to the UFC. He dropped his first 2 fights in the UFC, but that first one to Danny Roberts, very, very close fight. The second one to Li Jingliang gets finished with just a couple of seconds left on the clock, in my opinion, or at least from what I remember. And then the Abubakar Nurmagomedov fight, Nurmagomedov does not do a good job of securing that top position, allows Zawada to clear that shoulder and complete that arm triangle that triangle choke, and he ends up with the submission victory. Now, Zawada, very crafty on the ground, high-level jiu-jitsu player, and with the inefficiencies that I said with Emeev in terms of his takedowns, I feel like this is a very sketchy spot for Emeev, especially if he wants to go the grappling route. Now, when he does establish that top position, I'm talking about Emeev here, he is very effective from on top. He has very solid ground and pound. He's able to really, with that lanky frame that he has, like his torso is very, very long, and the amount of momentum he's able to generate when he's going for his ground and pound situations, he generates a lot of power, and he's able to like put a hurting on some of these guys. Now, he's not really able to find finishes more often than not. The guy's a bit of a decision machine, and that's a little bit of an attribution to his safe style of fighting. He doesn't really overextend himself to really get put out or to get submitted or anything like that, but he does put himself close to those situations. Again, the takedowns against Stolze was very iffy for me in terms of kind of seeing how he racks up against a guy like Zawada. Zawada, has potential still. He's only 30 years old. I feel like he still has some improvements that he can make in his game, and obviously that victory over Nurmagomedov puts a ton of confidence back into him, especially in a fight where it was probably a chopping block fight, where he probably would have got his pink slip if he didn't get the victory against Nurmagomedov, and that was a tough task too. Going into Russia, fighting Nurmagomedov, and fighting Abubakar in his UFC debut was almost a sign that the UFC is like, you know what, let's throw in Zawada there, let's see how he does, but we do want to see Abubakar get the victory, to carry on that Nurmagomedov lineage per se. Unfortunately for the UFC, Zawada goes out there, gets the victory, cashes as a plus 225 underdog, and maybe not spoils the plans of the UFC, but I'm sure that they were in the Nurmagomedov business and not the David Zawada business. But if Zawada is able to go out there and spring another upset against a solid Russian prospect like Emeev, maybe the UFC starts looking at Zawada a little bit harder. But I think this is a good fight for Emeev in terms of being able to go out there and have a solid game plan in terms of striking, waiting for his opportunities, and landing the better shots on Zawada, as I believe that a more technical striker like Anthony Rocco Martin would be able to solve the puzzle that is Emeev. I don't think Zawada has that type of striking skill and the awareness in terms of dealing with a guy that's as efficient as Emeev, but he does have a bit of power in his hand, so if he lands on Emeev, he could definitely hurt him, something that Nicholas Tosa was able to do in that first round, at the end of that first round against Emeev. And also, if this fight does end up on the ground, Zawada does have a good ground game as well, too, to potentially make things a little bit more competitive. However, I'm still siding with Emeev, maybe not as a lock of the night play anymore, but as a possible parlay piece on one of my plays for this card. I wanted to go with initially a 5-unit minus 250 lock of the night play here on Emeev, but I can't do that anymore after running the tape. I'm more comfortable with him as maybe like a 1 or 1.5 unit parlay piece with something else on this card, because let's be honest, this card is a little bit chalky in some of these spots, especially in the spots that I feel like guys have a better edge on, but still not to the level of playing them at minus 220, minus 250 as a straight play and wagering, the 4 or 5 units on a lock of the night play. So I do like Emeev here still. I think he gets the better of the striking exchanges, lands the better shots. Zawada does seem to have a little bit of trouble when it comes to his cardio as well too. It seems to slow down a little bit later in his fights, and I think that's where Emeev could definitely take advantage later in fights as well too. Whether it's getting the takedowns or just getting the better of the striking exchanges. Emeev has never really shown any issues with his cardio, and it seems definitely in check. And you would expect it to be in check, especially for a guy that is as low output as he is. So given the cons on the Emeev side, which are his low output, sometimes putting himself into submission prone opportunities for his opponents, and then obviously not fighting the level of competition that would really set him apart too. That's the last thing I wanted to touch on in this breakdown. So he's fought Sam Alvey, middle of the pack kind of guy, Alberto Mina, who I don't even know if he's in the UFC anymore, Stefan Sekulic, who was making his UFC debut, I believe, on short notice in that fight. Anthony Rocco Martin obviously loses that fight, but Rocco Martin, I'd say above average, but not a top 10 to top 15 type of guy, so that type of loss is not the greatest on your record. And then Nicholas Tosa, who as well, another UFC debutant. So we've been seeing him going out there and beating the guys that he's supposed to beat as a heavy favorite, like against Sekulic, minus 680, against Stolze, minus 420. He's going out there and doing what he's supposed to do. Now, is he going to be able to do that against a vet like David Zawada as a minus 250 favorite? I don't think he deserves to be a minus 250, but I still think he goes out there and gets his hand raised. So I'll go with Ramazan Emeev to win this fight with a bit of a striking clinic here, landing the better shots on Zawada, and then taking over even later in this fight with his very efficient style. So once again, I'll go with Ramazan Emeev to win this fight via decision.